Hello, I'm Steve Yoder. I was born and raised here in Marshall County, and came back to be the head basketball coach at Plymouth, and enjoyed every bit of it.
Were you born here in Marshall County?
I was born in Plymouth at Parkview Hospital, and that was 1939. And when it all started for me with sports was probably 1944 when we moved to the country. And the first thing that happened was a basketball backboard went up on the side of the barn. And of course we had wide open spaces there, big yards, so we could play baseball, softball, and just about everything else. And we had every tool in the toolbox. We had a football, a baseball, a basketball, we had bats, we had all that stuff. And I had four brothers. But in 1944 was the year we moved to the country. And that's when it all started. And I think it was because my parents knew we had to have something to do. And sports was the deal, especially for boys back then. Eventually the girls got involved, which was good also. But so that's how it all started. And I got addicted more to basketball and baseball probably than the others. Played high school football for 2 years and was very fortunate because I played on a good team with good teammates, and the coach was running a system back then that allowed somebody with some speed to get a lot of yards. Who was me. You know, I had some foot speed. And because we had probably one of the best fullbacks that's ever played at Plymouth, Chuck Johnson, and the ball would be handed off to Chuck going into the line, and the quarterback could pull it back out and pitch it to me, and all I had to do was run. And I think it was my senior year that I was fortunate enough to lead the state in yards per carry, 10.2 yards, I think it was, per carry in the state of Indiana. But it was all because of the quarterback having the ability to deceive, and Chuck Johnson being such a powerful runner that everybody focused on him. And the quarterback, fortunately, made the right reads as soon as he saw that defensive end crashing in on Chuck to pull it back out, pitch it to me. So then it was just a foot race. So I won a lot of those foot races.
You probably were used to running from your brothers, right?
Well, yeah, or running after them. Either running from them or running after them. But it was good. Give us something to do. And then when I got to be older, 10 to 12, I started playing baseball, a 10-12 team in town. And I would stay at my grandmother's, and she lived up on the north side, about a block from Centennial Park. So I would stay there, and I would go over in the morning about 9 o'clock when our coach at the time was coming over to rake the baseball diamond. And the way he raked it was he hooked a set of box springs up to the back of his Studebaker, and I jumped on the box springs to hold it down, and he drove his car around the infield. And then when we were done, we had to clean all the rocks out of the box springs, but they weren't on the infield anymore.
That's ingenious.
Yeah, it was really, really interesting, really good. The coach was Fred Kehoe. And
Heard the name.
yeah, and I'd just go over there because I was staying up with Grandma, and and that's how I got involved too, watching some of the best players that ever played in Plymouth. At night, I would wander over to the park, tell Grandma, I'm going over and watch a softball game. Well, the Franklin Scrappers were playing, and that was they were one of the best softball teams in northern Indiana. and they played. There's a couple teams out of South Bend, one out of Mishawaka, one out of South Bend, Studebaker out of South Bend. Those guys were off the charts. And teams from Michigan City, DePort, they would come in and play these guys. The guys from Plymouth were really good. I mean, they were really good. Like Al Kralovansky was the first baseman. Al was about 6'8", so he had quite a range, and he was light on his feet and covered the ground he had to cover. Everything was done smooth with him. And Pete Wickey played on the team, and Pete was a really good player. Even had Pete, I'm sure, had a tryout with the Cubs, if I recall. One of the Greenlee boys, Jack, I think it was a pitcher. Jim Hansen, who ran the lumber yard here in Plymouth, he was a pitcher. These guys were really good. And Billy Myers was the second baseman. And Billy was the one guy that I'd watch all the time because he was small and fast, real fast. And I always thought if he'd ever had the opportunity, because first of all, timing's everything. If you're in the right place at the right time without being told, one coach one time told me that's called initiative, being in the right place at the right time without being told. But I think had Billy been there and not knowing, I mean, nobody knows whether you're in the right place at the right time. But he'd have been a Major League Baseball player. Because in my mind, he did everything you had to do at second base. And I thought he was as good as Nellie Fox, who was playing for the Chicago White Sox at the time. So I really got hooked on those guys that played for the Franklin Scrappers. You know, the guy who owned the team had a scrap yard here in Plymouth. Yeah. And so, yeah, it was kind of a normal, logical thing to name them the Franklin Scrappers. And Cliff Sider was in the outfield, one of the outfielders, really good. These guys were all good players. And I think as it winded down, of course, I got older, played 13 to 15, then played in high school, then went off to college. And one of my teammates in high school, Chuck Johnson, then also played with the Franklin Scrappers for a short period of time. So it was really, but it was the Scrappers that were really what I got interested in. And I still was interested in the Chicago Cubs. And of course, I had to be interested a little bit in the Chicago White Sox because my grandfather was a big White Sox fan. And we used to talk a lot. He'd sit and watch games, and we'd talk a lot about, he would tell me how good the Sox were and why they were better than the Cubs. And of course, the Cubs didn't beat anybody very often in those days, you know. But the White Sox were really good back then. They had Carrasquillo and at shortstop, Nellie Fox at second base. Their pitching staff was great. But anyway, those were some thoughts that I had back then, how my mind started being triggered about sports.
So when you think about back to that time watching that team, what memory just pops up to you when watching the Franklin Scrappers?
Oh, I just think watching Pete Wickey and Billy Myers, and the pitching was just, I don't know what distance. I think they were throwing from 45 feet, or it was just a laser shot coming out of the pitcher's hands. And to hit, you had to be, your eyesight. So there's two things about sports. It's hand-eye coordination. Those two things, hand and eye coordination. If you got good hands, you got good eyes, and coordination has to be part of it, then you got a chance to be pretty good. You could play a lot of sports. If you don't have hand-eye coordination, it's awkward. Because those two, if they don't fit, there's a problem, you know. But just watching some of those guys, the thing that stuck in my mind was how competitive they were. because they were playing some teams that, gee, I mean, you can imagine Studebaker out of South Bend, they weren't going to lay down for anybody. And there was a good team out of Mishawaka that I don't remember the name of them, but none of those guys were all competitive. I mean, the competition was just fierce. And I was a kid, but I'm recognizing that because my grandfather had told me at different times, you can watch a guy that's competing and you can tell who's competing to win and who's just out there to compete. There's a difference. Don't forget that.
So what was your family life like on the farm with all? Did you have, was it just 4 brothers, or did you have sisters?
No, I had 2 sisters also.
Okay, so you had a family.
Yeah, we had 6. So when we sat at the table, there was 8 of us. And we did sit at the table. Unlike today, I don't think a lot of families do that. But back then, that's the way it worked.
So what was dinner like with 8 people?
Well, it was interesting because there was always enough food, but when you took the food, you didn't get any more unless everything was eaten off your plate. So whatever you took, you were supposed to eat. That's it. No questions asked. And I remember one time we had all sit down at the table and Mom had already poured everybody's milk, glass of milk. And Dad came in and he said, "Don't anybody eat till I come back." And he went out in the driveway and he got a handful of pebbles. And he brought them back in the house. And he dropped 3 or 4 pebbles in all of us boys' glasses. And my mom goes, "Dad, what are you doing?" "Never mind what I'm doing. I'm doing it." So he put those pebbles in our milk. And he said, "Now I'm going to tell you boys for the last time. If I drive in this," I'll never forget this, because he said, if I drive in the driveway one more time and I see you guys pitching stones into the horse tank, you're done." Now, being done, met the belt was coming off, you know. But to make his point, he went out and then Mom says, "Well, they're going to drink a pebble." Dad said, "If they're that stupid, the horses aren't drinking those pebbles either. They're not stupid. If our boys are stupid enough to drink those pebbles, then they got a real problem." And you weren't going to drink the pebbles, but he made his point. You don't throw something in something that an animal's drinking out of. If that's going to happen, then you're going to have to do it.
Another valuable lesson.
Yeah.
It sounds like it stuck with you over
Yeah.
the years.
Oh, yeah.
So was your dad into sports, or you
No, Dad wasn't into sports, but he always supported it. Grandpa was, and my uncles were. Dad wasn't against it. And he provided ways for us to get where we had to get. Between him and Mom, that was never an issue. And he said, "Sometimes I just can't do it. You're going to have to walk in town." And I'd walk the railroad tracks because there was a railroad track not far from us. I just walked the railroad track till I got in town, or I'd take my bike and ride it, go across the railroad tracks and down to Route 30 and ride in. It was only like 3 miles. So that was fine.
got some exercise?
Well, you know what? You did what you had to do.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
You did what you had to do.
Now, when you got to town, were there games going on, places that we were trying to get to? Or?
Yeah, well, there's either practice or games. And I was fortunate enough to have some ability where when I was 10 to 12, the one year when I was 12, the 13 to 15 team needed a player. So after I had played in the 10 to 12 game, like it would be at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, and that game was over, and then the 13 to 15-year-olds played. And then when that game was over, at 6 o'clock at night, the softball league would play. So one time I played 10 to 12. They moved me up to fill in the 13 to 15 age. And that night I played on a softball team for Kiwanis. I was one of the members of the softball team. I was only 12 at that time. But that particular day, I went 10 for 13 in batting, playing in 10 to 12, 13 to 15 in Kiwanis.
That's a good day.
Well, that's a good day.
Yeah.
And it made the newspapers. So it's a fact. It's not a story I'm making up in my mind.
So you had some ability in baseball. When did basketball start coming into play?
Basketball started when we moved to the farm and the hoop went up. And I can remember a lot of times in the winter time, it was cold, and the basketball, the air inside would just, I don't know what it freezes or whatever it does, but couldn't bounce it. So all you could do was shoot it. So I was a much better shooter than I ever was a ball handler. And I've known guys in this county who were great ball handlers and really could anticipate moves by teammates and make plays. I wasn't a playmaker. I was more of just a shooter. But it was because of a lot, I didn't have anything to do, and I would just had my chores all done. I would just put my coat on, put a hat on, go outside and shoot baskets, and it'd be sometimes 20 degrees out. And the air in the ball, of course, was whatever, frozen or whatever. It wouldn't bounce. So I'd just shoot. I'd just run around out there, grab the ball, shoot it wherever it went. I'd grab it, shoot it, run over here, shoot it. And then my brothers would get involved too as time went on, and they did the same things. Then we went to junior high, of course. Basketball really, it was good in the 5th and 6th grades too, because Plymouth, Washington School, Webster School, St. Michael's, Jefferson School, we had a league, and you played in them. And the coaches at high school back then wanted to know who the best players were coming up, where were they, what schools were they in. They just keep track of you. Then you got to junior high, and they kept more track of you. And then by the time you got to high school, they knew who you were. And it wasn't, and they always knew. I mean, it wasn't like they were grabbing at air. They knew. And so made the high school basketball team, and we won the sectional in '57. Was the first time. The last time Plymouth had won it was '37. Can you imagine that? This is the county seat, and the sectional, which was the biggest thing in Marshall County in sports. To my knowledge, there wasn't anything bigger. And every team coming into that sectional, they didn't care if they won the sectional. They wanted to beat Plymouth. And trust me, they were all good enough at different times to do that. Bourbon was, Argos was, Culver was, La Paz was, St. Pierre came in here, North Judson came in here, Knox came in here, Royal Center came in here. All these teams. There had to be 12, 13 teams.
And you were getting everybody's best shot.
They wanted, first of all, to beat Plymouth. Their second goal was to win the sectional. Their first goal was to beat Plymouth. But I don't think the players didn't really catch on to that. Coaches did. But the players didn't, you know, we can beat whoever we play. Yeah, well, that's the wrong attitude. You can't beat whoever you play unless you're prepared to beat whoever you're playing. And, but anyway, we won it in 57. We were supposed to win it in 58. We got upset by somebody. The Paz, I think. And in fact, we'd been predicted to win the regional in South Bend by one of the sports writers in South Bend. But we got beat in the sectional, you know. 57, we won it when it was probably the best team in the county was Argos. And we beat them. To one of our players, who he was a good player, Richie Schultz. He was a good player, but he wasn't a big scorer. He rebounded more and stuff like that for us. And he'd score 6 to 8 points a game, but he scored 29 in that game. And made us happy and made Argus not so happy.
So who was your coach then in high school? Yeah.
My coach when we won the sectional was Maury Davis.
What kind of coach was he?
He was a tough guy, which I really respected. There was no nonsense. And I can remember the start of that season, first day of practice. We were all in there just shooting around, waiting on coach, you know, shooting around, waiting on coach. And a couple guys went over and sat down on the stage area. There was a big stage behind us. And they sat there on the stage and they were just waiting, but they were whistling. And he came out and he heard that and he went nuts. You know, he said, this is not a whistling museum. This is not a whistling practice. This is not whatever. And I don't want to ever come in here and hear anybody whistling again. And you know, there's people like that. And I respected that, but I don't like anybody whistling either. Yeah, and I got in a car once in Indianapolis when I was a lot older, and I was with the manager of the Keystone Grill, which was one of the top restaurants on the north side of Indianapolis. And that guy became a buddy of mine. I used to stop in there all the time, and he'd take care of me. And he took me one year to the race, got his girlfriend, said, we're going to the race. And I sit down. He said, Steve, you got to sit in the front seat. And I said, okay. And I'm a happy camper. You know, I'm going to see the Indianapolis 500. We got a suite upstairs. We're going to a suite. And I started whistling. I don't know what I was whistling about. And he said, stop that whistling or you're out of this car. And I could tell by the, you know, he didn't want it. He didn't want to hear it. He's a former military guy too. And he just said, that's enough. I've never heard you do that, Yoder. Why are you doing that? I said, I don't know. Just, yeah, we're on the way to the race. But I remember that's the first thing in our practice. I thought, oh, this guy is no nonsense, because we didn't know. You know, but he was an excellent coach. He demanded things out of his players. He got it. We won the sectional. He left the next year, went somewhere else. And, you know, but he was, in fact, he was on the, in 1970, when we won the sectional here and went to Fort Wayne, he was sitting on the end of the scores table, right next to where I was coaching. And I don't know whether he was evaluating referees or whatever he was doing, but he was there. I remember that.
What did you think when you saw him?
Well, it was, you know, it's great to see him.
Yeah.
And we had communicated at different times over the years, but he was kind of a special guy because, you know, he's like a drill sergeant, you know, but somehow he made you understand why, and you didn't question him. That was who he was. And we all appreciated it. Yeah.
Did you find yourself, you know, when you got into coaching, did you find yourself using any of his methods or anything like that?
Well, yeah, I don't know. It was kind of a no-nonsense thing for me too. Come on, guys, we don't do it together, we're not going to get it done. And there's one thing I know we're not going to get done. I don't know how good you are, and you don't know how good you are, so don't be telling me how good you are, okay? We're going to get in shape, and we're going to be the strongest team on the court and the best conditioned team. And then if our ability's good enough, we're going to beat the people we play. If they're better than we are, and we're in better condition, and we're stronger, and they don't play up to their potential, we're winning. And that was the approach. So I knew after playing some college ball that the strongest team and the best conditioned team was a team that had the chance to win. You obviously needed to have players, good players. But the other thing was you needed to recognize who the best players were. And if I had a team where the players didn't know who the best players were, we had issues until we got that straightened out. And you have to keep in mind that players were going through a lot of things. Their dads always thought they knew more than the coach. Their grandparents were willing to pay them $1 for every point they made or for every rebound they got. And if they wanted to pay him $1 for every rebound they got, that didn't bother me. But if they wanted to pay him $1 for every point they got, that bothered me. Because there were some guys shooting the ball that shouldn't have been shooting it. They were trying to make money. Didn't work. You know, so, you know, until we got everybody on the same page, we didn't have a chance. You don't have a chance in a team sport until you get everybody on the same page. And your coach better understand that. If he's a soft guy and he's going to give in to any outside pressure or give in to a player, you're not winning. It's not going to happen. Yeah, yeah. And it's you know, it's the way it is in a lot of things. And you start to believe in the person because he's not, you believe in that coach because he's not trying to force you to do something you can't do. He's trying to get you to recognize that if you're not the strongest and you're not the best conditioned, there's a chance that you don't win because you don't play up to your potential. And once you get everybody convinced that this is really important, then you're not intimidated by anybody. And I think that's the critical thing. If you're strong, physically strong, and you're in condition, you're not going to be intimidated. You're not. It's not, you've already paid a price for it. It's not going to happen. So that's kind of the way I approach things. And my guys, I think, that played for me in high school could tell you that. That 70 team was a special team. Not that the 73 team wasn't a special team, but it was too. Both of them won the sectionals, won the regionals, went to the semi-state. One of them went to the finals of the semi-state. So, you know, they paid a price for it to get there. But that's why they got there. You don't pay a price for something, you're not gonna get there, you know. That was what was so good about the '82 team that won the state for Plymouth. You know, they had a couple players who were pretty good. And everybody else on the team knew it. And they knew those were the guys they had to get to. They had to get to Scott Skiles. They had to get to Phil Wendell. And Phil Wendell, probably more than anybody, made sure the rest of them understood that. And they got it to Scott. And Scott was off the charts player. Yeah. And he was in college too. It was his first game at Michigan State. I was the head coach of Wisconsin, and I had a player, Ricky Olson, who was also a freshman, and he and Scott hooked up. Both of them scored 32 points that night, and Michigan State beat us, but it was a crazy game for those two guys. And you know, we'll never know this because I was coaching at Ball State and I was recruiting Scott, but I knew Scott wasn't coming to Ball State because everybody knew that in his mind, he could play a level above Ball State. And I knew he thought that way. But I thought, well, I always thought he was waiting on an offer from Indiana or Purdue, and the offers didn't come, or Notre Dame, and the offers didn't come. And I thought, man, maybe there's an outside chance. So I kept recruiting him. Well, then I get the Wisconsin job. So I called Scott right away. And I don't know if he'll recall this or not, but I called him and I said, hey, Scotty, it's Coach Yoder. I just took the Wisconsin job. Do you have any interest in Wisconsin? And he goes, oh, Coach, I just told Judd Heathcote yesterday that I'm coming to Michigan State. Well, you know, Scott's going to live up to his word, you know. And but I've often wondered how good we'd have been at Wisconsin if we'd have had Skiles and Olson on the same team. See, Scott was a guy who really understood about everything that was going on the floor all the time. And Ricky was just a shooter. And he didn't have the mentality of a Scott Skiles as a basketball player, but he was a hell of a shooter. Scott would have made him a lot better because Scott would have opened up some opportunities for other players, which would have given Ricky a chance to be open more. But I knew that. But a coach would know that, a player wouldn't know that until you had the player, and then you could start, you know, grooming him for these different roles, you know. Scott was a special guy, you know. Then we had 3 Indiana All-Stars in Plymouth. Steve Phillips, Bruce Grimm, Scott Skiles. I don't know if there was any other Marshall County boys that made it or not. Argos had some really good teams and were well coached.
I had Phil's in here.
Did you?
That was a
Yeah.
couple of weeks ago,
Yeah. And I don't know if any of Phil's guys became Indiana All-Stars or not. I don't recall that. Phil was a heck of a coach, though. And those boys in Argos, that's all they did was play basketball. I mean, if they couldn't get a game up somewhere, you know, they were moving. They were going to where the game was. If they had to go to Culver, if they had to come to Plymouth, but they'd get games. They were,
Working in gyms.
yeah, oh yeah, they'd get in the gyms, and their coach, Bob Heilman, back then in my day, when I was talking about 57, he was letting them in the gym. And that's what coaches should do. Kids didn't have anything to do. They needed to, you know, and it was helpful. Get them to play, you know. So those were good good lessons to learn, you know.
And Bruce Jennings came in, and he was an Argos guy there
Mhm.
on some of those teams where they had that run, where they were, won, I forget, on the 60-some games in a row.
They were.
Late 70s. And yeah, he said that they would, break into barn, they had played barn ball, and
Yeah.
they'd go and they'd sneak into a gym somewhere and, play like they would make way, they'd find a game to play, so.
That's what you have to have. Today you don't have that. Today's everything. I live my life on this.
Yeah. Everything that you
Well, yeah, so how are you going to get any good? You get good using your thumbs. What's that get you? You know?
Yeah.
God.
So you went away to college.
Yes.
And where'd you go?
Illinois Wesleyan. I went away to college to Illinois Wesleyan.
You played basketball there?
Played
right?
basketball there for 2 years. And that's where I got started, and played baseball there 4 years. But I had a bad ankle sprain, and it really limited my movement. In fact, I came back to South Bend and went to an orthopedic place to get a brace for my ankle. That it wasn't a big brace, but it had steel up both sides of it, and I could still get my tennis shoes on, but it was hard to move. If I played baseball, I didn't need that. Didn't need that support. So my college coach in basketball said, "Look, Steve, you've lost your ability to move laterally the way you need to. I want you to be my assistant coach." And I said, "Okay, what does that entail, coach?" So I'm still in college, and I'm being a college kid. I'm misbehaving a little bit here and there, and I'm thinking, wonder what this means. Well, what it meant was I had to take about 8 guys who weren't playing on the first team and take them to junior colleges around the area and play games. I had to prepare them for that. And he gave me the time to prepare them. And he helped me. But when we left in a van, I'm driving a van. I'm a junior in college. I'm taking 7 or 8 guys, and we're going over here 25 miles or 50 miles or 60 miles to play another team. And I barely know what I'm doing. So that's how I got started.
That'd be a valuable experience.
Yeah, it was a valuable experience, and most of the guys that I was taking were older than I was. This is when guys were coming through the military, whatever part of the military they were in. They were coming to college. They were all older than I was, but they were good guys. Military guys are some of the best guys because they've been trained, they've been disciplined, they understand certain things that others that age don't understand, And it was good. Those 2 years, it was a great experience for me. And then I graduated from college, and I get a job in the western suburb of Chicago as a junior high teacher. And I was there 2 years. And the coach at high school called me one day and asked me if I would come over and be the sophomore coach. He said, "You're going to have to be interviewed, but I think I can get you the job." So I went over to interview, and everything was going fine until I interviewed with the lady who ran the history department. And we talked, and she was really nice, and she liked what I was saying and everything. Then she asked the one question. She said, "Do you have a master's degree?" You can't lie. I didn't. I was out of school 2 years and hadn't started she says, "Oh, the requirement here in my department is you have to have a master's degree. And this was to get a job as a sophomore coach at Glenbard West High School. And Glenbard West was like a small college campus. And they were called the Hilltoppers. And they set their school set up on a hill. And it was like a small college. And they were really particular about their teachers having master's degrees. So, and I don't know how, I just don't recall how it actually happened. I found out that Plymouth had an opening, and I took advantage of that. I called, and they had interest in me coming back home, and I was not coming home as a head coach, which was good. I was coming home as an assistant. They were hiring a new head coach, Marvin Tudor at the time. And Marvin was great to work for. I mean, he taught me a lot, and I, for 2 years, had two really good teams. They were both 17-3. So things were changing in Plymouth. Where before they couldn't beat anybody, all of a sudden they're getting players. And to be honest, Nick, everything's timing. Nothing's, you got to be in the right place at the right time. And fortunately I was. And that's how I ended up back here. And for 2 years, I was the assistant coach. And Marvin Tudor was the head coach, and he was very successful. And after 2 years, he left. And I don't know if he left for a basketball job for sure, or whether he took a principal's job in Huntington. But it was a step up for him, a pay and just a step up from the high school, from Plymouth to Huntington. Huntington was bigger. We played Huntington in football. And I remember that because when we played against them, I had a really good, that's one of the good nights I had at Huntington. And I was probably fortunate to survive it because they ran me into fences over there and everything else. But anyway, that's a different story. That's part of the football stuff. You're getting ready to go out of bounds and they just, all of a sudden somebody's shoving you and you're up against a fence, which is 10 yards off to the right, But anyway, that's another story.
So when he steps away, did you feel like you were ready to be a head coach?
Yeah, I thought I was. But there were obviously members of the community that didn't think I was. And that was the most interesting part of high school basketball in Indiana. There was always people in the community who thought they knew more than the principal and the superintendent and the school board. Unfortunately, at times, some of those people are on the school board. So I didn't know what was going to happen. But an interesting story was one day I was living out at Lawrence Lake with my family, and my wife came out on the pier with somebody, and I couldn't see because my youngest son, Dan, and myself were in a boat, and we were off at one end of the lake fishing. But we had a whistle, and if the whistle ever rang, we needed to come back. So my wife blew the whistle, and so I looked up to see, and I couldn't recognize who the man was that she was there on the pier with. But I knew I had to go back. So we gathered our stuff up, and I started rowing back to the shoreline, to our pier. And as I got closer, I recognized it was the mayor. And the mayor at that time was Art Thomas. And Art was the former football coach at Plymouth. And I knew him real well. And he knew me. And so we get back, and I said, "Hey, Coach, how are you? What's going on?" And he said, "Well, I don't know how to tell you this, Steve, but you need to get the pressure off this school board. and I think that you'll get this job, but you got to get the pressure off. I said, what pressure are you talking about? He said, well, we got parents that are calling that of players that played for you that want you to have the job, and we all kind of figured that you put them up to it. I said, I've talked to one parent, and not because I called him, he called me. And that's the only person I've talked to. I've talked to nobody's parents. But I had talked to one because he called me and was throwing support my way. He says, Coach, is there anything I can do? You know, and I said, no. And he could have, if I'd asked him to, because he was in position to. But I said, no, I don't want any help with this. I need to know that I'm the guy they want. And so I told that to our Thomas, the coach. I said, Coach, I got no pressure on anybody, nobody. And if I don't get the job, I don't know what I'm going to do if you keep me as assistant coach or whatever. But there was guys in the community, they said, oh no, he doesn't know enough yet. He needs to go up to Lakeville or up to La Paz or somewhere and get a head coaching job and get some experience. And I said, oh, wait a minute. You know, I'm right here. I know these kids, you know. And eventually I got the job. And when I got the job, I called Bill Nixon, who was a teammate of mine and classmate and friend. And I asked him to come to Plymouth to be my assistant. And he was at Knightstown. And that's how Bill came to Plymouth. Bill came to Plymouth because of a phone call I made and convinced him to come. But that's going back, way back, a lot of years. That was in '67, I think, that happened.
So that first year, first time as a head coach, going into that year, what were you, how were you feeling confident, or were you a little anxious?
I was anxious before every game. There wasn't a game. And I knew we were prepared, but it didn't matter. If you're a competitor, you're worried about everything that's going to happen. Are we going to have a good warm-up? Are we going to be tuned in to warm up? Are we going to be, concentrating on what we're supposed to do? Or, are we waving at our girlfriend in the crowd? What's going on here? I want to, So every game, I was apprehensive about what was going to happen. And I seldom ever came out for the pregame. But I had ways of finding out what was going on.
So how did you get did you have a philosophy going into that year? Were you trying to do,
Well, I think in the first year, I thought our players were knowledgeable about what the game was all about, how we had to compete. They paid a price for everything we did, conditioning and strength-wise. I knew we could compete. And I'd never coach if I didn't think we could compete. I didn't want anything to do with coaching. If we weren't going to be able to compete, we could never win. You have to compete, and you can't compete unless you believe you can. And we had some special players. And now, Steve Phillips is an example. The first, I didn't even know we were going to get Steve, because he was in junior high out at West Township. They were getting ready to consolidate. We didn't even know if they were consolidating in Plymouth or where they were going to Culver. And all of a sudden, they come to Plymouth. That consolidation came to Plymouth, didn't go to Culver. And I got a phone call from one of the junior high coaches out there. Said, hey, Coach Yoder, we just want to make you aware of something. You're going to get a player that's going to be special. And they started talking to me about Steve, you know. Well, they were right. So when he came to town, I went and met with him and his mother and assured her that, you know, we were to look out for him. And she was a really nice person. Steve's parents were divorced. His dad was a great guy too, easy to get along with, and he lived in Bremen at the time. And they were good people. And he was the kind of guy that he didn't go anywhere without a basketball. And, you know, he's the reason, along with Jerry Kralovansky, Rick Williams. There was a whole bunch of guys, Tom Thayer, Madden. There's several guys. And you know, when you start mentioning names, you're always going to forget somebody. But they were a special group, that 70 group. But started in 66, 67. Phillips was a freshman. And I had him on my varsity team.
So what made him such a special player? What was
His instincts. Special guys have different instincts than others. When he was on the floor, he could recognize when somebody was open and how to get him the ball, or how he could move a little bit with the bounce and get the pass to them. You just can't beat a guy who's got instincts. If he's got instincts and he's got ability, you got a player. Well, this kid had both, and he could score. He scored 54 points in one game.
What was it like having a player like that on your team?
Well, it was gave you more confidence in every game you went into. You were still nervous. You were still apprehensive because you're going to compete, and you never know. Are all these guys ready to compete? Are they like you or unlike you tonight? And if there was a guy that was not ready to compete, you had to figure out a way to get him to compete during action time, not during warm-up time, during action time.
Did you have ways to
Yeah, if you like getting your shirt grabbed and have you come right up here to me. That was an interesting way.
Yeah.
That was kind of an attention grabber. Didn't hurt nobody. Oh, it would have shocked somebody today. Oh my gosh, the coach put a hand on a player. Oh my goodness. Well, I had a handful of his jersey, and we were talking nose to nose. But today, you did something like that. Oh, there'd be some mother somewhere or some dad somewhere that would be going, oh, he touched my boy. Oh my goodness. Well, I'd have to tell him to take him home and continue to baby him, and he'll maybe grow into a man. Maybe.
So you guys had a great team in 70, right?
Yeah.
And you won regional, correct?
Yeah, we won the regional. We beat Elkhart Central.
Okay. So heading into that season, how was the feeling about the team? Were you, did you?
Oh, we felt real good about our team and about our players, but we didn't have any idea all this was going to happen. This is just this is something that you want to get to, and as you get the opportunity, you got to take care of business. First game is sectional. You lose it, you might be done. The second game, you lose it, you might be done. You're not thinking about, am I going to the regional? Am I going to the semi-state? You're thinking about that game. We almost lost the final game that year of the sectional. I think we played Marion High School on Mishawaka. And that was one of the games I needed to get the attention of one of my players. And it was never Steve Phillips, and it was never Jerry Kralovansky. But there were other guys on the team. And it was seldom any of the bench players. They all knew those guys were all hungry to get in the game. So we got the key guys' attention, and in that game, because we needed him. His teammates needed him. But didn't hurt nobody. We won the game. We won the sectional. Now we go over to the regional. Now we're playing like, I think they're the 5th ranked team in the state or something. And of course we were ranked too. I think we were ranked as high as 11 or 12 that year. So, I mean, you know, we had got some recognition. But still, you're competing against the best. They had a very good player who we didn't know for sure whether we could slow him down or not. We had to do everything to slow that team down somehow without holding the ball, which we weren't going to do. We had too much talent to hold the ball. But it was a knockdown, drag out, but we won it. Well, and we won, I think, because we knew we were strong and we were in condition and we could compete and we weren't intimidated. And so we
were
won.
you able to enjoy that victory, like when you win a big game like that?
Yeah, I mean, when we came back to Plymouth, I mean, the streets were lined with people. You know, we went to the high school and everything was good there. Fans were all in the school waiting on us. Oh, and you don't get back until 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. You know.
So the community response was
The community response was great. Yeah, very good. Yeah, it was always positive. I mean, we were fortunate that we got the support that we got.
So you're heading down to semi-state.
Right, heading to Fort Wayne.
Yeah. So how did you prepare for that?
Well, our first game was against Kokomo Hayworth. And they were a bigger team than we were. But once again, because I think our guys felt they weren't intimidated by him, you know, that was not part of the deal. They weren't intimidated by anybody. So they were big. Bruce Rose I remember Bruce was one of the big players. He was very good. And of course they had others. You don't end up in a semi-state without having players. You can't have one player. That's not going to work. You got to have players. So we were ready to compete, and we had won that game, and they came back and tied it, and it went in overtime. And in overtime, I just remember when we came over, when the game was tied and the guys came in the huddle, I told players, I said, look, we've already won this game once. We need to win it again. And fortunately we did, you know. But, I mean, it's always a struggle when you get to that level, you know. So many things can happen. Missed free throws here and there, you know. Just anything, dribble ball off your foot, anything that you know, those things against those kind of teams, they all matter, you know. And you don't know that then, you know, but you learn that along the way.
So how did the team react to, what was their kind of emotional reaction? It's probably the furthest that...
Well, see, you had to play 2 games in the same day. So you just played an overtime game, and now you got to get ready about 4 hours, play another game. And you know that back then, I don't know, we never thought much about it. We just did it, you know. And I think that's kind of the approach you had to take, because if you didn't take that approach, then the players would have an excuse. And the last thing you want to leave and go compete about is leaving a team with the ability to have an excuse about something. So you try to stay away from all that because it'll drift into their minds. No matter how tough they are or whatever, well conditioned they are or whatever, mental things all of a sudden become a real challenge. And we played a good Carmel team, had Indiana's Mr. Basketball on it, and he was good, but our guys did a great job. Could have won the game. You know, we missed some free throws. I had a technical foul that hurt them. All those things into one thing, and we lose. And I don't even remember the final score, but it had to be a 1, 2, 3-point game. And that kept us from going to the finals in 1970, or we'd have been in the finals. And then in 73, we won the sectional, went to the regional, and I think we beat Warsaw in the regional, which was a big thing to do because they were really good. Ike Tallman was their coach, and I can remember when I got the Ball State job, he wanted that job bad, and he had some connections. I thought he'd probably get it. But anyway, we beat Warsaw that afternoon and then went on to the semi-state. And in the first game of the semi-state, we played Anderson High School. And they had like 3, good scholarship players on that team. I mean, really good. And you could either decide to run with them or hold the ball. We weren't going to hold the ball. I mean, we had guys who could get up and down the floor, and we had guys who could shoot. And so we just decided, well, we're going to run. Let's go. In that game, I don't remember the final score, but it was a high score. It was like 96-88, something like that. I'd have to look it up to know. But that game, it was just up and down and up and down. One of their players, I remember Roy Taylor, I think his name was, African-American kid who was really a good player. And I mean, he scored at will. He's one of those guys that, now we could have held the ball, we'd probably still gotten beat because athletically they'd have beat us up. We'd have taken it because we were strong enough. We weren't intimidated by them. But we thought, shoot, we had guys could shoot. Bruce could shoot it, Bruce Grimm. And the other guys on the team could too. It was just a matter of they got to miss more shots than we do. And they didn't. That sometimes is the name of the game, the number of shots you get. That's why you can't turn the ball over. You give a team in basketball more shot opportunities than you get, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah, I had Mike Delp and Gary Myers
Yeah.
injured a couple weeks ago.
Oh, did you?
And yeah, that was a fun time.
Yeah. Gary was, Mike was good too, but Gary he was one of those guys you could put him on just about anybody on the floor to defend and he'd go after him. Yeah. He was quick. I mean, he could guard a guy 6'2", 6'3". He didn't care about that stuff, but he was conditioned not to care. That's how we tried to get our guys thinking. You're good enough. What are you worried about? Are you scared of that guy? Why does he scare you? We'd ask him questions like that. Nixon and I would just, what do you, I don't get it. It looks to me like you're scared to death. What are you afraid of? And so, you play with that head a little bit. And they know they're strong enough, and they competed against each other every day. And those guys did compete. Occasionally we could have a fight. Then Bill and I both knew, let him go a little bit. Then we can break it up. Yeah, that's okay. That doesn't hurt anybody, you know?
So looking back at your time at Plymouth, is there any memories that just pop right out to you in your time there?
Well, the big one, I think, was the first one. You know, just winning the regional. Shoot, we'd barely won sectionals, and all of a sudden we're going to win a regional. We won the sectional in 70. The last one we won was 57, and that was the team Bill and I were both on. 57, and we weren't supposed to win at 57. But see, that's the other thing. Supposed to win? That's nuts. You don't even think about that. But the writers write about it. Sportscasters talk about it. Everybody in the barbershop's talking about it in the coffee shop. Going to the movie theater, people are talking basketball. I don't know about these guys. You know, whatever. Doesn't matter. None of that supposed to stuff matters. And but we win in 57. But just think about that. We don't win again until 70. In Plymouth, you know, county seat. But you can't let Argos know that. They don't care. Bourbon doesn't care. You know, Culver doesn't care. Oh, they all want to come in and beat Plymouth. North Judson had the Finger Hut boys. Those guys were tough as nails. Knox had a guy over there, Dick Mast at one time, who was one of the best, but Culver had Kowach. That these are guys before us. But that shows you what the program was all about. And then Culver has Allen Triplett, down sometime around our time. And La Paz had good players. I mean, it wasn't. And Bremen. It was all about beating Plymouth. And I'm thinking from 57 to 70, they don't win one?
Kind of a long drought.
Yeah. That's a long time. A lot of people don't remember that type of thing, you know. And I think before we won in 57, they might not have won it. I think they won it in 37. Come on now.
So kind of the last question I usually ask everybody is to kind of take a look back over their, career and kind of just talk about what coaching and playing sports, how has that impacted your life? How has it shaped your life?
Well, pretty much it's, the path I got on, the trail I followed in my life was all about sports. Once I got in it, and I got in with both feet, and I wasn't afraid to move. I had to do what I had to do. I didn't know where anything was taking me. I just knew that I maybe had an opportunity here to, I mean, I could have stayed in Plymouth, and when the opportunity came up, I thought of the future. I want to be a college coach. I got to go. So I did. The best advice I ever got, I think I got from my grandfather when he said, if you want to be successful in life, you need to learn one thing. Most people don't understand this, and I didn't. And I didn't really know what he meant till I got into coaching. But he said, you need to be able to connect to people. And if you can't connect to people, you're going to have a problem. And so he was telling me that one day when we were sitting watching a baseball game. And I thought, I'm not sure what he's talking about. I wasn't smart enough, I guess. But when I got into coaching, I got thinking about that. And there's a lot to that. You must be able to connect with people. And so I still think that's one of the most important thing any young person can do, is to learn to connect to people. And I get questions all the time, how did you become a pro scout? Well, I was already connected. You know, I was a college coach. These pro guys are coming in watching my practices. You know, they're looking at my players. They're asking me questions about the players at Michigan State, the players at Indiana, the players at Purdue, the players at Marquette. All the schools were playing. So the connection was made. And guys today, kids today, they graduate from college and they want to become the graduate assistant coach. They don't want to go out and coach somewhere. I used to tell younger people when I was younger, wait a minute, you want to coach? Be careful. Go down to the YMCA and tell them you want to coach one of their teams. And find out if you really want to coach. Find out what it's all about. Don't say you want to do something and you expect somebody to give it to you. You go down there and find out first. Go to the church league and tell them you want to coach a team. And then when you're done with that, you come back and tell me you want to coach. And if you do, I can help you. I can give you some advice on what you got to do. But first advice I'll give you, go get a team and coach. And find out if you really, or if this thing just looks so nice. You know, it's out there, it's in front of people, it's you're doing your thing, you love this, you love that, that's fine. I'm all for that. But go find out if you really want, you don't know anything about coaching. So go find out how tough it is to deal with 5 guys, all with different brains, all with different abilities, all with, the biggest part was all different hearts. Some hearts don't beat. I'll never forget, I was scouting in the NBA and I was on a pro scout assignment, not a college assignment. I was in Chicago and I was at a Bulls game. And I saw Scott was the head coach at that time. And I saw Scott before the game and he said, Coach, when this game's over, come on down to the locker room. So he had a really good staff. And so after the game, I wandered down towards the locker room. I saw the security guy and I told him, Scott told me to come down and take me in. They went and checked. I brought somebody out. They took me in there, and Scott and his 3 coaches were sitting back in another room and took me in there. And he said, what do you think? I said, well, there's some rough edges out there, Scotty. He said, yeah. Well, what'd you think about this guy? I said, well, that guy right there, he's a brand new car and he'd like to drive it. But you open up the hood and there's no motor in there. That's his problem. And Scott goes, you're absolutely right. He thinks he's a brand new car. It's really shiny. It looks nice. You open up the hood, there's no motor. So you can't compete without that. And the car's not going to run without it. But that was one of the real interesting times that I had with Scotty at that time.
So do you see a lot of former players out in the world? And
I see some, but I don't see a lot. And I'm not chasing them, and they're not chasing me. They got things to do. I got things to do. I hear from a lot of my former players a lot. You know, they'll text me. Most of them have my phone number. They'll text me, Coach, what's going on? What are you doing? Did you play golf today? You know. Yeah, I did. Most of the time I did.